that my ruling does not extend to possible use on cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. And
as to him. And I'll give you this back, too.
The cell phone examinations, it incorporates both types of examinations. And he would testify that he reviewed the records, and the calls from to and from Michael McCarthy's phone number and COSA's 4 phone numbers, that's already in evidence. So he will just testify. I'll show him the exhibit that's already in evidence. But as to Ms. Bond's Nokia phone, the old phone, the one with all the photographs on it, he would testify that he reviewed her phone records and there were zero communication. As to Ms. Bond's, over 100 phone calls between May 1st and September's, or communications. And on Dee's cell phone, and by the way, that's the subject already of a separate exhibit as well. But as to Dee's cell phone, there are also over 100 calls. I'm sorry, that's the one that's the subject of the separate exhibit. So basically what he's doing is saying, I've reviewed them, here are the call patterns that I see. Let me just ask you, are all these records that are referred to, McCarthy's phone, Marshall Bond's phone, Dee's cell phone, are all those in evidence? They're not in evidence, they're marked for identification because we've agreed, both sides have agreed that the entire record should not go to the jury because they'll start poring over things that Your Honor has excluded as irrelevant. And rather than try to redact everything, we will certainly miss things. The idea is that we're selecting portions of the identification exhibits. That's why we entered the stipulations, so that it's clear that we're picking from the same records. Right. He's reviewing records that are admitted for identification, but there's no dispute that they are authentic. And obviously, defense counsel has all of them, too. Okay. So you would like this summary to be admitted into evidence? I'd like to actually have him, as he's testifying, refer to it and then ask him, does this summary accurately reflect your review? And then he'd say yes, and then introduce it in evidence. Okay.
Well, Section 1006 of the Massachusetts Guide to Evidence makes it clear that to the extent that summaries are being admitted, they have to be accurate. And frankly, to say that there are over 100 calls, which doesn't, I mean, how many of these entries talk about over 100 calls? Is it 101 calls? Is it 10,000 calls? I mean, that's not an accurate reflection. That's not an accurate summary. If they reviewed the records and specified the number of calls.
So if you're saying if it said 108 calls or 235, then it would be all right?
That's one of my objections.
Okay.
Secondly, I do object to putting in this summary without an underlying basis in the record. So if Mr. Deacon wants to pick out these phone calls from the records which have been identified or marked for identification and put that in evidence and then have the witness testify that he reviewed these records, and of these records there are X number of calls from this number, X number of calls from that number, and so on, maybe that would be admissible. But to simply take something on the basis of something which is not in evidence, create a summary which is clearly not accurate because it doesn't specify the numbers, we object and think it's inadmissible.
The case law which defense counsel is citing under that section, which is Welch v. Keene Corp., 31 Mass Appeals Court, 157, 1991, requires that the summaries be accurate. It does not require that the summaries be precise in the sense that defense counsel is using it. If there are over 100 calls, it is accurate to say there are over 100 calls. If defense counsel wants to cross-examine him and say, why, how many over 100, he's free. I should think he's free to do so. But to say that something is not as precise as it conceivably could be is a far cry from saying that it is inaccurate. I think if defense counsel could show that it was misleading in some way, that the lack of precision somehow misled the jury, that would be a legitimate basis for objection. But just saying you could have been more precise doesn't make it inaccurate.
Okay, and with regard to the fact that the records themselves are not in evidence, you're saying they could be. The only reason all the records are not in evidence is that it contains some matters that frankly aren't relevant. It's not that they're not authentic. They are authentic. They are from relating to these phone numbers. They have been provided to both sides.
Yes, Your Honor. And it would be, the defense counsel is free to contest the accuracy if he wishes by putting in whatever records he can collect the records and contest to say that there are not over 100 calls. But absent that, I don't see it as an objection. I think it goes to weight, not admissibility.
If the purpose of this summary is to show the number of calls, to say over 100, frankly, is not accurate. There may be over 100, but there may be 1,000, there may be 2,000, there may be 101. So it gives an inaccurate impression to the jury, which the jury is unable to determine from the summary. The summary.
Well, but wait a minute. But the records are here, marked for identification. You have the records. If you want to introduce these records with regard to any cross-examination about this summary, you're free to do that.
Yeah, I know I can, but we're right in the middle of a trial. I don't have the time to go through thousands of pages of phone records to deal with this summary. The record says that if the party wants to introduce a summary, it has to be accurate. Okay. And there's no basis to say that saying over 100 calls is an accurate summary of the record.
Okay, I get that. You made that point.
And if he wants to, and I also object to it not being in evidence. He has the opportunity to put this, to take from the record whatever it is that he thinks is admissible and introduce it. And then he can introduce an accurate summary.
Mr. Deegan, you were about to stand up for something.
Oh, no. All I was going to say is that if something is listed as over 100, there are over 100 calls, that's accurate.
Exactly. I think we've gone back and forth. I don't think it's inaccurate. Clearly, Mr. Shapiro, you've had these records for some time. I'm sure I would be surprised if you hadn't done your own analysis. But regardless of that, the records are there. You can use the records to cross-examine. I think your objections go to the weight. And given that there's no dispute as to the authenticity of these records, and that they're marked for identification only because there's some irrelevant stuff in there, not with regard to anything else, I'm going to allow the summary.
And Your Honor, the second page is just the second page, which I think I would want to mark as Exhibit A, as the number in A, reflects that on 4-2 there's a request for payment of money. Between 4-2 and 4-21 there is no cellular activity. What could be a little confusing about that is there are a couple of instant messages from Michael McCarthy to Santos Bonacci. I expect Trooper Swan will testify that those instant messages can be generated from the phone that's connected to Wi-Fi, even if, in other words, it doesn't require cellular service. So.
Okay. So is there an objection about this? Is this, you want this admitted as a separate exhibit, Mr. Deacon?
I think I would have it as Exhibit A, since it's referenced in the summary.
Which one are you referring to?
The record that's attached, that I gave you, that's attached to the summary.
This one? Yeah, I object. I don't know. Frankly, there's searched items which are certainly not relevant. GZA beneath the surface. Chef Raekwon only built 4 Cuban links. What are you up to? Reply with a status. CVS Harrison ads. Google search. The head and the heart. I mean,
I think the purpose is to show that there is, to try to show that with non-payment, there was an interruption in service.
Well, then whatever else should be redacted.
Your Honor, I've already redacted at the top entry where you can see a redaction line. That was a Charles Manson search, which, despite the fact that there was some testimony about it, has been ruled out. The rest of these entries are
Innocuous.
they just show routine web searches, and I think
Okay,
to that extent.
I don't see anything, as to these other items that may not directly pertain to that point. I don't see anything that pops out as problematic.
Yeah, well, I object.
Okay. So your objection's noted. The jury's here?
Yes, Your Honor. Lined up and ready to come down.
Okay, we'll bring him down. I'll give this back to you. And by the way, the reason I'm kind of anxious to get going is a juror has a doctor's appointment today at 3:15. So we'll bring him down.
Okay, Your Honor. We'll bring it.
So, Mr. Shapiro, I'm just informing counsel that we're going to break early today at 3:15 because of a doctor's appointment a juror has. He's changed it a number of times and really asked if he could keep it, and since we are doing well, I said yes. And of course, tomorrow I have one case, multi-defendant case, that I'd like to deal with. It should take about a half an hour. I'm thinking we could still work in the afternoon, but again, it's going to be a short afternoon. The jury is very anxious to get an update. So I am going to tell them today that I expect the case to get to them sometime next week, probably the earlier part. Is that fair to say?
Sounds right to me, Your Honor.
All rise. Jury entry.
It's just cross. We're going back.
Move that microphone a little closer to you.
Sure.
To amplify your voice. Just, yeah, there you go. And just speak loudly so that all the jurors can hear you.
Sure.
Okay.
The other day you showed us a video recording of the apartment at 115 Maxwell Street.
That's correct.
Did you make that video?
I did not.
Who did?
That was conducted by one of the troopers from crime scene.
Let me just see, is the microphone, Mr. Ciampa, can I see, the microphone doesn't appear to be working. Can you just check the operation, the system there? In the meantime, Trooper, you're just really going to have to speak a lot louder.
Okay.
Because the microphone does not appear to be working. Okay. Okay, let's just do the best without a microphone, so just keep your voice up, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you take any photographs, digital photographs of the scene?
I did not.
Did you record in a report what was recovered from the scene?
Yes.
And was that the extent of your activity?
At that time, yes.
Now, you also returned to conduct, or as part of a team conducting another search at 115 Maxwell Street on September 22nd, is that right?
That is correct.
And in between the first search on September 17th and the second search on September 22nd, was the apartment secured?
It was not.
It was not?
It was not.
So people could come and go from that apartment without any kind of police presence?
Well, as far as police presence, there were none, but my understanding that the apartment...
Well, Just tell me, were there police that prevented people from going in or out of that apartment?
There was not.
Are you aware that a person by the name of Joe Amoroso entered and exited that apartment between September 17th and September 22nd?
I was not aware.
You're not aware?
I was not aware.
But no effort was made to keep people, the public or people involved in the case, from going in or out of that apartment between the 17th and the 22nd?
There was none.
So people could have gone in, taken things, left things in between those two searches, and the authorities would not have known about that.
That is a possibility.
Isn't it standard police practice to secure a site of an alleged crime until all of the processing of that site is completed?
Well, information that was revealed,
No, the question was, isn't it standard police practice to secure the site of an alleged crime until that site has been fully processed by the crime scene people, the forensic scientists, or anybody that might be involved in gathering evidence?
yes,
But in this case, it wasn't done, was it?
to a certain extent it was.
To a certain extent it was?
Yes,
Was that site secured, yes or no?
between the 17th and the 21st, it was not.
22nd.
Oh, the 22nd, excuse me.
It was not. It was not.
It was not.
Okay, so that's a violation of the standard police practice.
Well, you can answer that yes or no.
What was your question again?
That was a violation of standard police practice.
To a certain extent, I would say yes.
Now, on the 22nd, you indicated that one of the things that you, or some of the items that you seized were 2 books.
That I seized?
Yeah, didn't you record the items that were seized?
On which search warrant are you
I'm talking
referring
about the
to?
September 22nd search.
I did not. I was not the evidence officer for that second search.
When you testified the other day, did you not testify that 2 books were recovered from the site of 115 Maxwell Street on September 22nd?
2 books were recovered from that site on that date, yes.
And those were, do you recall what books they were?
2 books referring to demons.
Mr. Champa, we have the exhibits here.
Trying to fix that one.
Do you want to, can you tap it and see if it's working? Nope?
No,
It's
ma'am.
not working. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Let me check real quick, if you don't mind, you know.
Plug it in, please.
No, Leon, I'm sorry.
Okay, so again, Trooper, just loud,
Yes, ma'am.
very loud.
I'll do my best.
Okay, Trooper Alstock, I'm referring to Exhibit 17. You recognize this?
Could you bring that closer, please?
And also Exhibit 18. And my question is, do you recognize these 2 exhibits?
Yes.
Are these the books that were recovered on September 22nd?
Yes, the second search warrant, yes.
The other item you indicated that was recovered was a refrigerator.
On the 22nd, yes.
Now, with respect to the search on the 22nd, was there a video recording made of the apartment on that date?
I have no idea.
Well, you were present, weren't you?
I was.
Do you recall seeing any other member of the team making a video recording?
I do not recall.
Do you know whether any still photographs were made of the apartment at that time?
I have no idea if there was.
Before the refrigerator was removed from the scene, were any photographs made of the refrigerator?
I have no idea.
Were any photographs made of the contents of the refrigerator?
I have no idea.
If an item was seized as evidence, isn't it standard practice to record either digitally or video of the object before it is taken away from the scene?
Yes.
So it's important, just as a matter of police practice, to document where a particular item was and the condition of that item before it's moved.
Yes, that is correct.
Was that done with respect to the refrigerator?
I have no idea.
Well, what was your role in this search on September 22nd?
To assist in securing any evidence that was seized from the apartment.
Did you secure the refrigerator?
Yes, I was one of
Okay.
many that carried the refrigerator
So-
out of the apartment.
If you were responsible for the refrigerator, did you document the location and the contents of the refrigerator before it was moved?
I was not responsible for the refrigerator.
Who was?
I would assume Trooper Herman was, or another member of my unit.
Okay. Do you recall seeing the contents of the refrigerator being taken out of it before it was moved?
I don't recall.
Do you recall whether or not, do you recall where the refrigerator was taken?
Where it was taken from?
Where it was taken to?
To the evidence locker at my office
And where is that located?
in the city of Chelsea.
Did you look at the refrigerator when it was placed in the evidence locker in Chelsea?
Yes,
Did you look inside and outside?
yes,
Okay, when you looked inside, was there anything in it?
there was not.
All right, so apparently the contents had been taken out.
Yes, if there were contents in the refrigerator, yes.
So are you saying you don't even know whether there was anything in it or not?
That's what I'm saying.
Now, on either occasion of a search, that is on September 17th going into September 18th, or on September 22nd, were there any drug paraphernalia recovered from that apartment?
I don't believe so.
Were there any drugs recovered from the apartment?
I don't believe so.
And that's something you would have recorded, would you not?
If I was the evidence officer, yes.
Well, on the first search on September 17th, didn't you say you were the evidence officer?
Yes,
And was anything of that nature recorded by you?
there was not.
Did you find any bloody syringes that may have been used to inject a drug?
I did not.
I have no further questions.
I think this should be brief, Your Honor.
Okay. Trooper, while we're doing that, I think your microphone's working.
It is working.
Good.
It is working
Okay.
now.
Trooper, when you left the search warrant, the execution of the search warrant in the early morning hours of September 18th, 2015, at that time, I'm not saying later, was there a plan to return and do a second search warrant?
There was not.
And as a matter of general procedure, when you complete the execution of a search warrant, do you continue to freeze the location in case at some later point you may decide that you need to come back?
No.
So, in your opinion, was there any violation of police procedure in the decision not to freeze that location after you completed the search warrant on September 18th?
There was no violation.
Trooper, you've had a chance to review photographs of the execution of the search warrant on September 17th and 18th at Maxwell Street, is that right?
Yes.
So showing you actually showing everyone Exhibit 119. Do you recognize what Exhibit 119 is a photograph of?
Yes.
And what is it a photograph of?
It's a photograph of the kitchen counter in the apartment.
And on that kitchen counter, defense counsel just showed you a couple of books that are exhibits in this case. I forget the exhibit numbers, I apologize, but one, the title which is Demons, and one the title which is The Other God. Do you see those books? And by the way, these photographs were taken when?
On September 17th, September 18th.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't quizzing as between the 17th or 18th, but during the execution of the first search warrant is what.
That is correct.
And do you see those books in the photographs?
I do.
Where are they?
If you're facing the counter,
You could actually circle them with
Yeah,
your
you can circle
finger.
with your finger. That's a good idea.
Press
Thank
the
you, Your Honor.
screen. Yeah.
Just put a lot of pressure. And I'm going to show you now Exhibit 120. I'll clear that circle. This is, I believe, has been testified to as a closer-up version. Does that appear right to you?
Yes, sir.
And do you see those books in Exhibit 120?
I do.
Can you please circle them? I have nothing further.
Okay. Nothing else, Mr. Shapiro?
Or you don't want to?
So Trooper Ailstock, the point is that if there is going to be any interest in examining an alleged crime scene, it's important to keep it secure.
Yes. Yes.
And you say that there was information that you obtained between the time of the first search and the time of the second search, which caused the second search?
Information that Trooper Herman obtained, yes.
And Trooper Herman obtained this information from Rochelle Bond, didn't she?
I believe he did, yes.
And he obtained that information on the morning of September 18th, correct?
That I don't know.
Well, you know, on the basis of your role in the investigation, that Ms. Bond was taken into custody on the morning of September 18th, don't you?
Yes.
Okay. And you know that on that morning, he interviewed her.
Yes.
Okay. So the information was obtained on the morning of September 18th at about the time that the search had just been conducted.
Objection.
Hold on, I'm going to sustain it as to the form of the question.
Well,
I think it's...
when was the search that was conducted on the morning of September 18th at 115 Maxwell Street concluded?
Between 2 and 3 a.m.
Okay. Then, later that morning, Detective Herman obtained additional information from Ms. Bond, correct?
I believe so, yes.
But no effort was made at that time to secure the premises at 115 Maxwell Street so that an additional search could be done on September 22nd, was there?
There was not.
No further questions.
So Trooper, just to be clear, the search that you conducted at 115 Maxwell Street on September 17th into 18th ended several hours before Ms. Bond was interviewed?
That is correct.
Nothing further.
I think we're done on this issue. So thank you, Trooper.
Thank you,
You're
Ronna.
excused. The next witness.
Your Honor, the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts called Jennifer Montgomery.
Call the court officer straight in, please. Right this way.
Yeah, start right here, and face your plug and raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear the testimony you shall give this court and jury that the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Have a seat, please.
Straight ahead.
Good morning, Ms. Montgomery.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jurors and spell your last name for the court reporter?
My name is Jennifer Montgomery, Montgomery.
How are you employed, Ms. Montgomery?
I'm employed at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab.
In what capacity?
I'm a forensic scientist 3 in the DNA unit, and I'm also part of the crime scene response unit.
And in each of those roles, what are your responsibilities?
As a forensic scientist 3 in the DNA unit, I'm a supervisor, so I supervise other analysts. I also process items in order to obtain a DNA profile, make comparisons to that profile, and write reports and testify in court when needed.
And what about in your role in the crime scene response unit?
As a member of the crime scene response unit, I'll be on call for certain days of the month in order to respond to active crime scenes. And while I'm there, I'll document the scene, identify items of evidence, and collect those items for transport back to the lab. And I also do preliminary screening for blood and semen, and also for gunshot residues such as lead and copper.
Can you summarize your educational background that's prepared you for these responsibilities, starting with your college education?
Yes, I graduated from UMass Dartmouth with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology, and I got a Master's degree in Science with a concentration in Forensic Science from the University of Florida at Gainesville.
And when did you graduate from each of those institutions?
In From UMass Dartmouth was 1998, and from the University of Florida was 2004.
And can you describe the course of your professional experience?
After I graduated, I spent about 8 years in research in various molecular biology and genetics labs, both here and in Florida, before accepting a job with the state police in 2008.
And how long have you performed the role of a criminalist in the DNA section? Either it's the wrong word, I'm sorry. An examiner?
A forensic scientist.
Thanks. In the DNA section, how long have you performed that function, either as a forensic scientist and or as a supervisor?
I was a DNA analyst, or a forensic scientist too, from May 2008 until April of 2016. And then I got a promotion to supervisor for this past year.
Are you a member of any relevant professional societies or organizations?
Yes.
Please tell us.
I'm a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences and a member of the International Association for Bloodstain Pattern Analysts.
Have you won awards for your work in this field?
Yes.
If you could tell us briefly about the award or awards.
In 2015, I received a citation for outstanding performance from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and in 2016, I received an award from the Department of Justice Investigative Award from the Office of the District Attorneys.
Sorry, I apologize. Your Honor, with the court's permission,
That's fine.
thank you.
Recommend.
Sorry. Did you at some point in your role at the Massachusetts State Police become involved in the investigation into the death of Bella Bond?
Yes.
And if you could tell the jury how you first became involved in that case.
I was on call on September 17th, 2015, and I received a call from my supervisor at about 10:30 at night to respond to 115 Maxwell Street in Mattapan.
And what was your role in going there?
My role was to act as part of the crime scene response unit, specifically to collect items to use as an alternate DNA standard.
And we've had a little bit of testimony about yesterday, I think, about what an alternate DNA standard is, but if you could just briefly remind the jury what that means in sort of layman's terms.
An alternate DNA standard is just an item that a person used that you can obtain their DNA profile for. So for instance, a cigarette that you know someone has smoked, or a glass that you know someone has drank from, we can process that item and produce a DNA profile and then use that for comparisons.
And can you describe what you found, what was going on when you got there, or what went on after you got there?
When I got there, I met with investigators from the State Police Crime Scene Services Section and the Detective Unit, and we went inside the apartment.
Generally, what did you see when you went inside the apartment?
It was a 2-bedroom apartment with a living room right when you walked in, and a bedroom on the north and south sides, and a kitchen and bathroom in between.
And did you yourself examine the apartment from a crime scene, a criminalist perspective?
I was specifically asked to look for items that might belong to a child to use as a DNA standard.
And did you do that?
Yes.
And what did you collect?
From the closet adjacent to the living room, I collected 5 items of clothing: a pink plaid jacket, a white hooded sweatshirt, a blue jacket, a pink striped sweatshirt, and a pink hooded sweatshirt.
What else did you collect?
From the bedroom that's adjacent to the living room, I was asked to collect a black child-sized shirt with a gold stripe on it.
Anything else?
From the kitchen, there was a basket next to the refrigerator which contained 5 hairbrushes and 3 bulb syringes or nasal aspirators, and also a black and white headband. I collected those 3 items. And there was a teething ring from inside the freezer shelf, which I also collected.
And did you collect anything else that day?
Yes, I also collected two toothbrushes from the bathroom and 2 pairs of slippers from the child's bedroom, and also 2 teething toys, a green toy and a clear toy with plastic beads.
And the goal here was to try to determine whether the unidentified child, baby doe, could be linked to Bellabond. Is that correct?
Yes.
What did you do with all the items that you recovered?
I brought all these items back to the crime lab and entered them into our system.
And once that was done, what did you do with them?
Nothing.
Did someone else examine them?
Yes.
Who was that?
I believe it was Edelyn Acker. She's a criminalist at the crime lab.
Did you have any further involvement in the case beyond this search for alternative standards?
Yes.
What was that?
I was called back later on October 9th to process the refrigerator from the apartment and a mattress from the apartment at the Suffolk County Detective Unit in Chelsea.
And did you process the mattress and the refrigerator?
Yes.
Describe, if you would, what you did with respect to the mattress.
When I got there, the mattress was wrapped in plastic and had a flat floral sheet, a white fitted sheet, and a pillow with a pillowcase wrapped with it. I collected those items to bring back to the lab. I then unwrapped the mattress and made observations about it. There was some light brown yellow staining or soiling on the top of the mattress. After this, I used an alternate light source, which is just a flashlight that we shine over the object, and when it hits certain stains, they'll fluoresce or glow, and I can collect those stains. So when I did that, I saw one stain, and I cut it out of the mattress and brought it back to the lab.
Did you do anything further with that stain?
No, I did not.
The brown yellow stain that you saw, did you collect that?
No.
Did you describe, if you would, what you did with the refrigerator?
I first made just general observations about the refrigerator. It was a white refrigerator with a freezer on top and the refrigerator part on the bottom. The handles were on the left-hand side. I opened the freezer. There was some coffee beans spilled in there. There was one hair on the floor of the freezer, a short hair, and then there was a longer hair on one of the shelves of the door. There was 2 shelves on the door. I then opened the bottom part, or the refrigerator section, and noted that there was some orange staining on the bottom shelf, which would be the shelf above the pull-out drawer on the very bottom. There was also a hair in that area, and then I opened the drawer and there was some brown staining inside the drawer and 2 short hairs.
What did you do after you made all those observations?
I then did some preliminary screening for blood on some stains.
And what were the results of the preliminary screening?
I screened the orange stain and the brown stains from inside the refrigerator, and they were both negative. I also did a general screen of the handles to open the refrigerator and freezer, and those were also negative.
Did you do any further screening tests for blood on the refrigerator, or is that all of them?
That's all.
What else did you do?
I collected the longer hairs from the freezer door and the shelf above the pull-out drawer.
And what was your purpose in collecting those hairs?
I was given information that someone might have been, with longer hair, might have been inside of the refrigerator, so I collected those.
You collected how many hairs total?
2 total.
From which locations?
One from the freezer door and one from the shelf above the pull-out drawer.
And were those hairs, what did you do with those hairs?
I packaged them and submitted them to the laboratory.
And were they examined?
I don't know.
Did you do anything further with the refrigerator at that time?
No.
Did you take custody of any other items at that time when you were in at the Chelsea office?
Yes.
What was that?
I received a green duffel bag to bring back to the lab.
Showing you what have been marked Exhibits 30, A, B, and C. Do you recognize these?
Yes.
What are those?
Those are the bulb syringe or nasal aspirators that I collected from the basket in the apartment.
And they appear, the 2 blue ones appear to be cut with sort of the hose end cut from the bulb end. Was that the condition they were in when you recovered them?
No, they were intact.
And what's your understanding about how they came to be this way?
This would be part of the criminalist's examination of the item.
May I borrow, these are your gloves, right?
No.
Oh, then I don't have to ask the problem. I'm going to take out for you Exhibit 102. And ask you if you recognize Exhibit 102.
Yes,
What's Exhibit 102?
that's the green duffel bag that I transported to the lab.
Nothing.
Good morning, Ms. Montgomery.
Good morning.
So as I understand it, your role at 115 Maxwell Street during the search on the night of September 17th and going into September 18th was to look for an alternative standard. Is that right?
Correct.
And an alternative standard, as I understand it, is an item from which you could obtain DNA.
Yes, an alternate DNA standard.
But it would have to be an item that you could verify came from a particular person.
In this case, we were trying to match items from the apartment to a profile that we had already established.
Okay, and the profile that you had already established was from the unidentified child that was found on the beach in Winthrop on Deer Island on June 25th.
Correct.
So you had a standard, a DNA profile of that person.
Yes, but it was an unidentified profile, so we were trying to identify the person.
And so the idea was to determine whether or not items taken from the apartment on September 17th and 18th, which you could identify as a child's item, would match the profile you had obtained from the child's body that was found on June 25th.
Yes, I wasn't going to do that processing, but I was there to find items that might be suitable for processing.
So you identified those items, you collected them as evidence, and you sent them to the lab?
Yes.
And the lab did analyze those items, did they not?
Certain items were selected to move forward with processing, and then a DNA analyst did the processing and made those comparisons.
Okay, and the DNA analyst who did it was somebody you supervised?
No.
You weren't a supervisor at that time?
I was a supervisor in April of 2016, but the analyst that did the work is not an analyst that's under me.
Okay, but you're aware of the results of that analysis, are you not?
I did not see a report, no.
So you don't know whether what the results from the analysis of the nasal aspirators that were taken from the apartment at 115 Maxwell Street were? You don't know that?
I know that there was an item that matched. I can't tell you the specific item.
But you know that one of the items matched the body that was found on Deer Island.
Yes.
And so a determination was made as a result of this analysis that the body belonged to Bella Bond.
Yes.
Were there any other items that, other than items that were collected to obtain or this alternate standard that you were involved in on September 17th or 18th?
Those are the only items that I collected.
And did you have any other involvement in the investigation until you went to the evidence locker?
No.
Excuse me?
No.
So the next involvement you had was on October 8th of 2015?
Correct.
And there you went to the evidence locker in Chelsea?
Yes.
And the evidence locker is actually a large room where all items of evidence, large and small, are kept?
Yes.
And at that point, you say you examined a mattress,
Correct.
and the mattress was wrapped in plastic.
That's correct.
And in addition to the mattress, there was a fitted sheet and a pillow and a pillowcase?
And a flat sheet.
And a flat sheet.
Correct.
So 2 sheets, a pillow, a pillowcase, and the mattress.
Yes.
And did you examine all of those items?
I didn't examine them on scene. I just packaged them up and brought them back to the lab.
And the lab is located where?
I brought them to Maynard, Massachusetts.
And then did you examine them on that same day?
No. From there, items are assigned to a criminalist who will then do the examination.
So you didn't examine any of the items?
No, my purpose was just to collect these items and bring them back to the lab. I did.
Well, isn't it true that you, in the evidence locker, removed the plastic and made an examination of the mattress with an alternate light source?
I examined the mattress and the refrigerator, but not the bedding.
Well, so when you were in the evidence locker, you did examine the mattress with a light source.
Correct.
And as a result of that examination, you determined that there were several areas of light brown, yellow soiling near the top of the mattress.
Yes, they were pretty much all over the top of the mattress.
Now, when you returned to the lab, did you make any cuttings of those stains?
When I was in the evidence locker, I made a cutting of one stain that when I looked at it under a certain light, it fluoresced. So I cut that stain out of the mattress, packaged it, and brought it to the lab.
Did you do any preliminary screening of the mattress or the other items of bedding or the item that you had cut out?
No, I did not.
So what did you do with those items, that is the mattress, the cutout from the mattress, and the bedding?
The bedding and the cutout was brought back to the lab, and the mattress remained in the evidence locker.
What happened with those items?
I'm not sure. If they were thought to be examined, it would be assigned to a criminalist, and they would do the examination.
Are you aware of whether they were examined or not?
I'm not aware, no.
But your purpose of making the cutting was that you noticed a stain, and you didn't do a preliminary screening of that stain, did you?
I did not.
So the purpose of making the cutting was to see if that stain might be evidence in the case.
Yes, I brought it back to the lab for further testing. It's not testing that I would do on scene.
But in your opinion at the time, this was an item of interest.
It was an item that, it was a stain that fluoresced under our light, so it could possibly be a probative item.
Okay, so is it fair to say that it might have been a probative item, an item of interest?
It's possible.
Okay, but you don't know what happened to that?
No, I submitted it to the lab, and then that's the end of my role.
And who in the lab, if you know, would have been responsible for examining those items?
A criminalist will be assigned to look at the items further if it's thought to be necessary. They'll look through the whole case and pick certain items. We don't test every single item, so they would make that determination.
But in any case, in your making the cutting, you made a preliminary determination that this was an item that may be of probative value.
Yes.
So, as on the basis of the examination you did of the mattress, there's nothing that you found on that mattress or having anything to do with that mattress that links Mr. McCarthy to any crime, is there?
I just collected items. I didn't process them further, so I didn't make any determinations.
Okay, so there's no evidence of any link between Mr. McCarthy and the crime?
Right.
On the basis of the work you did? Yes,
I just transported evidence. I didn't examine anything.
And in fact, there's no evidence that you were aware of that a crime had been committed on the basis of your examination?
Of the mattress?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to tell that.
So then you said that you examined the refrigerator?
Correct.
And the refrigerator was in the evidence room?
Yes.
Had the refrigerator been examined prior to your examination of it?
When I was at the apartment, I know that the freezer door was opened because I retrieved a teething ring out of the freezer, but I didn't examine it further.
Okay. When you obtained the teething ring from the freezer, was the freezer full?
There were items in the freezer.
What kind of items? Food items?
Yes.
Was the freezer full?
I don't think it was full. It was perhaps half full.
Okay. And what about in the refrigerator itself? That is the refrigerator area under the freezer. It was under the freezer, right?
Correct.
And did you make any examination of the contents of the refrigerator when you were part of the original search team?
I did not open the refrigerator, no.
Do you know if the refrigerator was ever dusted for fingerprints?
I do not.
You know what an item looks like if it's dusted for fingerprints?
There's usually a black residue on it.
Okay. Was there a black residue on the refrigerator at any point?
Not when I saw it in Chelsea, no.
So when you saw it at Chelsea, there was no black residue?
I didn't notice any.
Okay. So then you made an examination of the contents of both the freezer or the interior of the freezer and the refrigerator.
Yes.
When you looked in the freezer, were there any food items still there?
Just a few coffee beans.
But the items that you had seen on September 17th or 18th had been removed?
Correct.
And do you know when or what happened to them?
I wasn't a part of that, no.
Okay. And the bottom part of the refrigerator, you examined that, there was nothing contained, no food items in there either?
Correct.
And you don't know what happened to any items that may have been there?
No.
Now you say that all told, there were a number of different hairs that you removed from the freezer and from the refrigerator.
Correct.
And how many hairs were removed from the freezer area?
There was one hair removed from the shelf on the door that swings open.
The shelf on the freezer door.
Correct. There was 2 shelves on the freezer door.
Okay. And one hair was removed from that?
Yes.
Were there any other hairs in the freezer?
There was one short hair on the freezer floor.
Okay. Did you remove that?
No.
You left that there?
Yes.
But you removed the hair from the shelf?
Correct.
Okay. And why did you only remove one hair when there were 2 hairs there?
I was given information to look for longer hairs and not shorter hairs.
So you were only looking for longer hairs?
Yes.
Did you have information as to how long to look for?
Not an exact length, no, just a longer haired person.
And when you looked in the refrigerator area, there were a number of different hairs that were observed there.
I observed 3 total.
Okay. And how many did you actually remove?
I removed 1.
And that was a longer hair?
Correct.
And the 2, the shorter hairs, you left there?
Yes.
Now, you said you also did some preliminary screening for blood in various areas of the refrigerator?
Yes.
And that screening was negative?
Correct.
Now, with respect to the hairs that you removed, what did you do with them?
I packaged them separately and transported them back to the laboratory.
And where did you send them in the laboratory?
From when I drop them off, they'll be processed in our criminalistics section, and then if needed, DNA analysis will be performed on them.
Okay. Do you know whether any DNA analysis was performed on those hairs?
I know that there was analysis on one hair.
There was an analysis on one hair?
Yes.
And who did that analysis?
That was Elise Coronado.
And the other hair, there was no analysis done?
No.
Why was there analysis only done on one of the 2 hairs?
A criminalist will examine the hairs and see if there's a root or a follicular tag. If there is, then it can go forward with DNA testing. If not, then it's not suitable for testing.
And you don't know what the basis of going, or of why one was analyzed and the other wasn't?
I believe that was the reason that one was chosen and not the other.
It's true, is it not, that you can do DNA analysis even if there's no root?
You can do mitochondrial DNA analysis, which is not something that we perform at the lab, but you can't do the traditional STR DNA analysis.
All right, but you can do mitochondrial DNA analysis. You just don't do it in your lab. You have to send it out.
Correct.
And were either of the hairs sent out?
I don't know.
Now, as a forensic scientist who has been, as you say, involved in the collection of evidence at many different crime scenes, is that right?
Correct.
It's fair to say that it's common to find in an apartment where people are living hairs in many different places.
Correct.
Including in the refrigerator.
Correct.
What did you do with the duffel bag?
I transported it back to the laboratory.
And to whom was it then submitted, if anyone?
I don't know, I just submitted it, and that was the end of my role with that.
And was this your role? I mean, what you've just testified to, was that the entire role that you played in this investigation?
Yes.
So on the basis of your involvement in the investigation, is it fair to say that there's no evidence that any of the hair in the refrigerator came from Bella Bond?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I didn't read the DNA report. I'm not sure of those results.
So you have no idea.
Correct.
On the basis of your information, however, you have no evidence that there was anything in that refrigerator connected with Bella Bond, on the basis of what you did.
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Ms. Montgomery, and I don't know whether you know this or not, but are you familiar with the term post-mortem banding on hair?
Yes.
And is post-mortem, briefly explain your understanding of post-mortem banding.
It's just a certain type of pattern that's on a hair that the criminalist will find if a hair has been shed after a person has died.
And do you see post-mortem banding on hair that's shed while a person's alive?
No.
Do you see post-mortem banding on every hair that's shed after a person dies?
I don't know.
If there is no post-mortem banding present on a hair, well, let me ask you this. If the question is, if you're looking for hair that was shed after death, if you don't see post-mortem banding, can you say whether it was shed before or after death?
No.
Defense counsel asked you about mitochondrial DNA testing that I think you said can be done on hair, although your lab doesn't do it. Is that right?
Yes.
That tests the DNA of the mitochondria within the cell.
Yes.
And from whom does a person inherit their mitochondrial DNA?
From their mother.
Everybody?
Yes.
So it's different in that sense from standard nuclear DNA where you get half from your father and half from your mother?
Correct. So you and your mother will have the same exact mitochondrial DNA profile, whereas with our testing, it's a unique profile.
So mitochondrial testing of a hair can't differentiate between whether it came from a mother or a daughter or a grandmother, a maternal grandmother?
Correct.
Nothing further.
So nothing else? Thank you. I'm sorry.
It can distinguish, that is, mitochondrial testing can distinguish whether it's from a male or a female, correct?
It's just looking at the maternal line.
Right, but you would be able to determine whether that particular hair came from a male or a female.
You could compare it to male or female, and they can have the same profile, so it can't distinguish that.
By the way, was there a known standard, DNA standard, taken from Rochelle Bond?
I don't have knowledge of that.
Do you know whether there was a known standard taken from Michael McCarthy?
I don't know.
No further questions.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Step down, you're excused.
People of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts call Elise Coronado.
You solemnly swear the testimony you shall give this court and jury, and that which is now pending to the Commonwealth, and the defendant at the bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God.
Good morning, Ms. Coronado.
Good morning.
Could I ask you please to introduce yourself to the jury and spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
My name is Elise Coronado, Elisse Coronado.
How are you employed, Ms. Coronado?
I'm employed by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab DNA Unit.
In what capacity?
I am a forensic scientist within the DNA Unit.
And what are your responsibilities as a forensic scientist in the DNA unit?
I receive samples known to contain biological material. Upon a series of processes, develop a DNA profile from that sample, write a report, and compare any known standards to the questioned profile that I processed. I then write a report and testify to my findings.
How long have you been with the Massachusetts State Police?
A little bit over 8 years.
Can you please briefly describe your educational background that's prepared you for these responsibilities?
Yes, I received a bachelor's in biology from Boston University, a master's in biology from UMass Boston, and a master's in biomedical forensic sciences from Boston University.
And when did you receive each of those degrees?
2003, 2007, and 2011.
Do you have any additional laboratory experience before you went to work for the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory?
Yes, during my master's with the Biomedical Forensic Sciences program at Boston University, my thesis project consisted of DNA analysis similar to the DNA analysis that I do at the lab right now.
Have you received any specialized training in order to perform your responsibilities?
Yes, upon hire at the state lab, I received extensive in-house training which consisted of lectures, oral and written exams, as well as observing senior analysts and demonstrating procedures back to those senior analysts.
And have you taken competency or proficiency tests in the course of this training?
Yes, every new procedure that I learned, I took a competency exam, which is to ensure that I know how to perform those procedures. A proficiency test is taken every 6 to 8 months, so twice a year I take a proficiency test that's administered by an outside agency to ensure that I'm continuing my competency in DNA analysis.
About how many samples have you performed DNA analysis on at your lab?
Over 500 samples.
What is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is the building commonly referred to as our genetic blueprint. It determines traits such as eye color, hair color. It is passed down from generation to generation, so you receive half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father.
Is DNA the same in every cell of a person's body?
Yes, it is. So no matter what we test, whether it's blood, semen, or saliva, the DNA profile will be exactly the same.
Did you become involved in an investigation into the identity of an unknown child whose body washed up on the beach in Winthrop in June of 2015?
Yes, I did.
And were you working with other DNA analysts in the course of your involvement?
Yes.
And who's that?
Kim Bonner is one of the DNA analysts I was working with.
And did you, are you familiar with the results of her testing in connection with this case as well as yours?
Yes.
What is the first DNA testing that either you conducted or that you're aware of in connection with this case, the very first? Let me ask a more focused question. Did the DNA section receive a known standard of DNA from the unidentified girl?
Yes.
And what was done with that known standard? Or is that an exemplar or a standard, I should?
Those terms are interchangeable, exemplar and known standard. It's just usually blood or saliva taken from an individual of presumably known identity, and a DNA profile is developed from that blood or saliva to use as a comparison to question samples.
And what was done with that sample? You received a sample from the medical examiner's office?
I did not receive that sample.
But at your lab?
Yes, the lab does receive a blood vial or saliva sample from the medical examiner.
And what was done in this case with that sample, and who did it?
Kim Bonner performed DNA analysis on that sample and produced a profile.
And when you say a profile, what does that mean?
So we look at 15 specific regions within our DNA Again, half is from our mother and half is from our father. And let me back up and explain the DNA process a little bit. So there are 4 steps to the DNA process. We receive a biological sample. The first step is extraction. We get the DNA out of the cells in that sample. We then quantitate that sample, meaning we try to figure out how much DNA we have in that sample. And then the third step is called PCR amplification. That's where we're making copies of 15 specific locations on the DNA and a sex-determining marker to determine male or female gender of that DNA profile. And then it's put on what's called a genetic analyzer, and we're able to use a software program to visualize that DNA profile.
And Ms. Bonner actually created a DNA profile from the exemplar received from the medical examiner's office?
Yes, she did.
Now I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in time and ask you whether in September of 2015 the DNA section received a sample from nasal syringes that were recovered from an apartment at 115 Maxwell Street.
Yes.
And what was done with those nasal syringes and who did it?
So again, Kim Bonner did the testing on those samples to produce a DNA profile from those nasal syringes.
So she followed the same procedure that you just described, that one would follow the same 4-step procedure with respect to the nasal syringes?
Yes, she did.
And was she then able to compare the DNA profile from the known sample from the medical examiner's office with the DNA profile from the nasal syringes?
Yes.
And are you familiar with her conclusions?
Yes.
And did you in fact also review her conclusions at the time?
I did not at the time.
Have you reviewed them since?
Yes.
And what was her conclusion with respect to that DNA comparison?
May I refer to the report, Your Honor?
Yes.
There were 3 nasal syringes. So the DNA profile from the unknown female toddler matched the DNA profile from the swab of the nasal syringe number 1 interior, swab of nasal syringe number 2 interior, and swab of nasal syringe number 3 interior.
So there's a DNA match between each of the DNA recovered from each of the 3 syringes and DNA recovered from the blood sample provided by the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you to go back now to your specific role. Did you receive, at approximately the same time that Ms. Bonner received the known standard from the medical examiner's office, did you receive samples in connection with this case?
Yes, I did.
And what were those samples?
I received a swab of the exterior top of a large plastic bag with a knot recovered from Deer Island, a swab scraping of a cutting of a stain from the black and white blanket in the bag from Deer Island, her vaginal swabs, external genital swab, and fingernail clippings from her right hand and left hand.
And what did you do with each of those items?
The same 4-step procedure to produce a DNA profile.
And at this time, the child was still unidentified, is that correct?
Correct.
And what was the purpose of conducting DNA analysis on each of those items?
To find a foreign profile to the unknown female toddler.
What does that mean, a foreign profile?
One that doesn't match hers.
So someone else's DNA?
Correct.
And what would be the significance at that stage of the analysis of finding foreign DNA? What could one do with that?
If a foreign DNA profile is found, it could be uploaded into what's called CODIS to the missing. Sometimes there's there's different categories within the CODIS database where family members may submit profiles for unidentified human remains purposes. Also, it could hit to someone who's already in the CODIS database system.
And I should have asked you this before, but when Ms. Bonner generated the DNA profile from the known sample from the ME's office, was that uploaded into a database?
It was uploaded into CODIS, yes.
Okay. And CODIS stands for what?
Combined DNA Indexing System.
And so your project in processing those samples was to look for foreign DNA?
Yes.
And just to be clear, does the presence of foreign DNA, well, I want to ask that question. And I'm going to ask you to explain your analysis in somewhat more depth, but bottom line, did you find foreign DNA?
I did not.
Ask that this be marked the next sequential exhibit you're on.
There being no objection, we'll get that.
137.
So before I zoom this in a little bit more, can you publish it to the jury? Can you explain this exhibit? Is this one DNA chart? I'll zoom it in, I promise. Was this one DNA chart or two DNA charts put together?
That's two DNA charts.
And on what's the chart on the left? What does that represent?
That is the chart that Kim Bonner produced of the unknown female toddler's sample.
And you
known blood standard, excuse me.
And you testified that that was a match for the samples from the nasal syringes?
Yes.
On the right, what is that a table of?
That is the table I created from the samples that I processed in the case.
So I'm going to zoom this in a little bit so it's somewhat easier to read. But can you explain what the table on the left, there's a sample description that's unknown female toddler, but then in the columns to the left there are numbers like D8S1179, D21S11, that kind of thing. What are those?
So those are the 15 locations STR locations that I'm looking at during the amplification process. There's also the 16th location, which is the third one up, AMEL, which stands for melagenin, which is the sex-determining marker. If you're female, it's XX. If you're male, it's XY. So you receive half of those numbers. We don't know which one from your mother, and the other half from your father.
And so on the left of the column, those are identifications of genetic locations?
Yes.
And in the right column, there is in each case two numbers. What do those represent?
So that is the repeated sequence. So there's 12 for the first one, D8S1179. That is a specific location on the 8th chromosome in your DNA profile. Your mother could have donated the 12, for example, and the father could have donated the 13.
So what we have on the left-hand table is a table of Bella Bond's genetic markers at each of those 16 locations?
Yes.
And you compare that to the DNA taken from the several items in the right-hand table?
Yes.
And did you find a DNA, well, first of all, let me ask you, is there a difference between finding a DNA match and finding consistency between DNA samples?
Yes, those terms are, so if we have a DNA match, for example, the external genital swab is a match because I have every location matches the location of the standard on the left.
So maybe if you could,
So-
with reference to the first, say, genetic marker in the Bella Bonds, unknown female toddler Bella Bonds.
Right, so she has a 1213 at D8, and there's a 1213 at D8 at the external genital swab, and all of the numbers match going all the way down.
So that when you go to D21, it's 31, 31.2 in both of those samples?
Yes,
And all the way down it's the same?
yes.
And what does that allow you to say?
That allows me to say that these two DNA profiles match.
Are there any other matches between Bella Bond's DNA sample and the items that you analyzed?
No, the other samples are consistent with, meaning, so there are some samples where you see an asterisk. That represents a number, but it's below our DNA profile. Let me back up a little bit. Looks kind of like an EKG. There's a series of peaks, and we have thresholds saying how high those peaks have to be to definitively say this is definitely a 13 at this location. If it falls below that threshold, but above the noise of the instrument, that asterisk represents a number. We just don't put it in the chart.
Why don't you put it in the chart?
Because it's not above what we call our calling threshold. So we put it as an asterisk. But we do use it for comparison purposes, but we don't use it if we were providing a statistic for that specific location.
And there's also in a few columns there's a notation NR. What does that mean?
That means no result. That means that
How does that happen?
it's just a low amount of DNA, so not every location amplified and was above the noise threshold of the instrument that we could see a peak at that location.
And then there's a couple of notations toward the right of the diagram, actually on the left and the right, that says INC. What does that mean?
That is, if you move the chart up a little bit, it stands for inconclusive, so you can see that at the bottom, the key there. That means that, for example, on her fingernail scrapings at CSF1PO, you see 10, inc. That means it was a low level profile and there was a missing, we're not sure if that location should be a 1010 or 10 something else, so we mark it as inc.
And you said that the external genital swab was a match to baby doe / Bella Bond's DNA, is that right?
Yes.
And when you say that the other locations are consistent with her DNA, what does that mean?
That means everywhere you see a number, it's consistent with her profile, and even the locations with the stars, that star represents the same number in that position in her profile.
So
we just wouldn't use it for statistical purposes, to be conservative.
So in any of these samples, the swabbing of the top of a large plastic bag with the swabbing from the white blanket, vaginal swabs, the swab of the right hand fingernail clippings and the swab of the left hand fingernail clippings, are there any genetic markers that are inconsistent, that they couldn't have come from Bella Bond?
Well, the locations in her fingernail clippings that are no result, like I can't say.
No, that's not my point.
Okay,
what I'm saying is
back up.
the alleles that you can call, the
Oh,
alleles
yes.
that you can see, the alleles that read, are there any alleles on the entire chart that could not have come from Bella Bond?
The alleles do not match the profile received from the unknown.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm sorry. I mean,
can you please rephrase?
Do you see any genetic markers that could not have come from her? Okay, I think this is, let me ask it a different way. Do you see any indication here of foreign DNA, meaning someone else's DNA?
None of these profiles were mixtures, so no, they were all deemed single source profiles.
They're all single source profiles, and are there any alleles that are not consistent with her alleles?
That we can visualize, no.
Was there, based on your results, did you request a known standard from any other individual?
Not that I did not request any.
Did anyone request?
Not that I'm aware of.
Was there any reason based on these results to ask for a DNA sample from any other individual?
No,
Why not?
because they were either consistent with the unknown profile. They were either consistent with the profile from the unknown female toddler or matched.
So, okay, so was there additional DNA testing conducted before she was identified? Was there additional DNA testing conducted in this case on other samples of other girls?
Not that we performed.
Was there any DNA? No, never mind. So just so that I understand, so we're clear, did you perceive, based on these results, that obtaining a DNA sample, let's say from the child's mother or from the mother's boyfriend with whom she lived, would yield any information with respect to the circumstances of her death?
I don't know. I don't.
So, just to be clear, you didn't ask for any other known standards, is that right?
I did not know.
And would you have asked for, suggested that known standards be obtained if you had found any evidence of foreign DNA?
Yes, I would have asked for known standards.
Nothing further.
Good morning, Ms. Coronado.
Good morning.
Now, Ms. Coronado, you've testified about some DNA testing that was done by Kim Bonner.
Yes.
And am I correct that she did the testing that matched the DNA obtained from some items that were recovered from 115 Maxwell Street to the DNA profile of the unidentified child found on Deer Island?
Yes.
And found that there was a match?
Yes.
And you say you reviewed her work?
I did not do the technical review of the work. I reviewed the file after it was reported.
Okay, so basically, you're looking at something that we're looking at that was provided to you in the course of your preparation for your testimony today.
Yes.
So you didn't do any of the actual testing, the examination, or review of her actual work product?
No.
But you did do testing of your own on certain items that were submitted to you?
To the lab, yes.
And where did those items come from? Do you know which criminalist or forensic scientist was the one who took the swabs that submitted them to your section?
Yes, Abby Scott took,
Okay, so...
was the criminalist.
And you mentioned swabs. Describe what a swab is and how they're obtained.
Could you be more specific if you swab, it's basically a cotton-tipped swab, like a Q-tip, and it's used to swab up biological materials such as blood or semen saliva, and it's prepared by the criminalist and sent over to the DNA unit.
And a Q-tip is used, a little stick
What?
with a cotton tip?
A sterile swab, yes. It's not a Q-tip, it's a sterile swab.
Okay. And is it used, is it ordinarily dipped in sterile water?
It depends on the process and the sample that you're collecting.
Okay. Now, you mentioned biological samples that are swabbed, like blood, semen, something like that?
Yes.
Are swabs made of other items?
I don't think I understand your question.
Are swabs made of items to determine if skin cells may be present?
Swabs are used to physically swab areas that may contain skin cells. Skin cells is another type of biological material that's tested in the DNA unit.
And I know there may be a newer name for it, but is that what is sometimes referred to as handler DNA?
Can you rephrase your question?
No. I'm asking you if it's...
understand what he means by handler?
I do understand what you mean by handler DNA. For example, door handle can be swabbed with a cotton sterile swab to presumably pick up any skin cells left behind on that door handle.
Okay. And is that the kind of swab that was done on the black plastic bag with the knot?
I'm not sure if there's any testing done by the criminalist other than the swabbing of the bag prior to it coming to DNA.
Well, looking at your exhibit, you say you tested a swab of exterior top of large plastic bag with knot.
Correct.
So you understood that a swab was made of the top of a large plastic bag with a knot.
Correct.
And the purpose of that swabbing was to determine whether there was any DNA in that area.
Yes, correct.
And you did a test, correct?
Correct.
And as a result of that test, you were able to determine that there was DNA, but that it was consistent with the DNA from Bellabond.
Correct.
And that there was no evidence of any foreign DNA in that swab.
I determined that swab to be single source profile.
And that single source you determined was consistent with Bellabond.
Correct.
And implicit in that determination is a determination that there was no foreign DNA, no other source.
Right. By it being single source, it was determined that it was not a mixture profile.
All right, so on the basis of that determination, there was no evidence that Michael McCarthy touched that bag, is there?
There's no evidence of it being a mixture.
There is no evidence that Michael McCarthy touched that bag, is there?
I don't know.
Well, you know that there's a single source, correct?
Correct.
You testified that that single source is Bellabond, correct?
It's consistent with the profile taken from Bellabond, yes.
And so is it fair to say that if it was consistent with the profile taken from Bellabond, that there's no evidence that Michael McCarthy touched that bag?
I cannot say whether or not anyone who or if anyone else touched that bag.
On the basis of your swabbing that you analyzed, on the basis of what you analyzed, can you not say that there was a single source and that single source is not consistent with Michael McCarthy?
No, all I can say, I don't know who or if anyone touched the bag, because just because it was swabbed doesn't mean that someone else couldn't have touched the bag. All I can say is that from the DNA profile I developed, it's consistent with the DNA profile from Bella Bond.
So, Mr. Shapiro, we've had this question put to a number of witnesses, and we're having the same struggle.
I haven't gotten a straight answer.
Well, it's because they're scientists and they're not prepared to answer it as you wish. So I think we need to move on.
On the basis of the swab that you analyzed, you understand that, the swab that you analyzed, not anywhere else in the bag, but the swab that you analyzed, is there any evidence that that swab had DNA from Michael McCarthy?
I've never seen Michael McCarthy's DNA profile, so I can't testify to his profile. I can only testify to the fact that the profile from the swab from the knot is consistent with Bella Bond's profile.
Now, you were provided with another question sample from another black plastic bag, were you not?
Yes.
There were 2 black plastic bags, and snippets or pieces of each of those bags was sent to your section for analysis.
It was the same plastic bag, just different parts of the plastic bag that were swabbed, I think. I think it was I'm sorry. It was, you're correct. It was a different plastic bag.
All right, so there were snippets of 2 different plastic bags.
Yes.
You've testified about your examination of one of those plastic bags, which is reported in the first column of the exhibit.
Correct.
What's the number of the exhibit, Mr. Deacon?
I'm sorry, the last is the chart.
It's on the back. Exhibit 137. Did you do an analysis of the other plastic bag?
So there.
Did you do an analysis of the other plastic bag?
If you're referring to item number 2-3.1.1, that's the other plastic bag.
2-3.1.1.1. Did you do an analysis of that?
Correct, yes.
You did? Do an analysis of it?
Yes.
And is that reported on Exhibit 137?
No, because a profile was not obtained, so there is no chart for it.
Okay. So what you're saying is that there was not sufficient DNA on that bag to make any determination?
Correct.
Now, the third item, third item that you were provided was a blanket in bag with a snippet and a swab and scrapings and cuttings of a stain.
Item 5-1.7.1.1, yes.
And again, you found that single source DNA.
Yes, it was a partial female DNA profile consistent with the profile from the unknown female toddler.
Okay. And that was true of all of the other items that you analyzed, with the exception of the vaginal swabs, where you determined there was an actual match.
The external genital swab had the actual match, yes.
Oh, the external genital swab. Everything else was single source DNA, correct?
Correct.
No evidence of foreign DNA.
There were no mixture. These were not mixtures. Correct.
And so is it fair to say no evidence of foreign DNA?
Correct.
And other than the match, all of the others were consistent with Bellabon's DNA.
The DNA profile from her, yes.
Now, there was testimony just a moment ago from Jennifer Montgomery concerning an examination, her examination of a cutting from the mattress, a mattress that was obtained from 115 Maxwell Street. Did you do any DNA testing with respect to a swab from the mattress?
No.
There was also a testimony from Ms. Montgomery concerning two hairs that were that she found in a refrigerator that had been removed from 115 Maxwell Street. Did you do any DNA testing on those hairs?
I tested one of the hairs from the freezer.
And that's not reported in your Exhibit 137, is it?
No.
Which hair did you analyze?
I analyzed item number 21-1.1. It was a hair removed from freezer shelf B, which was the refrigerator removed from 115 Maxwell Street. And it was a separate occasion of testing, so it wasn't tested with these samples. There was an insufficient amount of human DNA on that sample.
Did this item have a root? That is, did the hair have a root?
I don't recall.
In any case...
Excuse me, let me backtrack. I take that back. It had to have had a hair for me to do the testing, yes.
Okay, so it did have a root, and you did do the testing, but you didn't find sufficient DNA to make a profile?
Correct.
And there was another hair that was obtained. Did you do any analysis on that?
No.
Why not?
I did not receive another hair for DNA testing, and I presume it's because there was no root. But I'm not 100% sure.
How do you know there was another hair if you didn't receive it?
Because I'm familiar with the case and I know that there was another hair collected.
But you're just assuming the reason that you weren't provided with it was that there was no root, but made no effort to determine yourself?
I'm provided samples by case management, and there was a reason as to why the other hair was not provided. I was provided the one with the root, and I performed DNA testing on it, and it was insufficient.
But you weren't provided with the reason?
I don't recall.
So, there's been testimony concerning a number of other stains on other bedding, blankets, various other items that were obtained by the criminalist. But other than what you have testified, you didn't analyze any of those items.
No.
With respect to the various items, the vaginal swabs, the external genital swabs, the swab of the right hand fingernail clippings and the left hand fingernail clippings, do you know what was identified and was swabbed? That is, what kind of biological fluid was actually identified?
No.
So you just did the analysis on whatever was on that particular swab?
Correct.
As whether it was blood or saliva or anything else? You don't know?
Right.
So, Mr. Shapiro, I keep thinking we're going to finish here because we have the morning break. Do you have a little while more?
Well, I have not a lot more, but a few more questions.
Since we're not so sure, we'll take a break now and come back in about 20 minutes.
Court, all rise, please. Raise and step down for me, please.
Ms. Coronado, before we broke, you had described the STR results that you obtained concerning your DNA analysis of a number of items of evidence, correct?
Correct.
And what exactly is STR results? What kind of analysis is STR?
DNA analysis?
Yes.
Yes.
That's it.
Does SDR stand for something?
Yes, it stands for short tandem repeat.
Okay. Is that a particular type of DNA analysis?
Yes.
Are there other types of analysis that you sometimes do?
Sometimes we do YSTR analysis.
And what is that?
That is specifically looking at locations on the Y chromosome of the DNA.
And what is the Y chromosome?
So it's males have XY, so they have a Y chromosome, only males.
Okay. And when you do YSTR analysis, why do you do that?
It is to isolate, presumably isolate male DNA when in the presence of, usually in the presence of a large amount of female DNA, because you're specifically targeting the Y chromosome.
Okay. So if you got positive results when you do YSTR testing, you might be able to determine whether or not there was male DNA involved?
If I produce a profile, there is usually a Y profile from that swab or item as a result. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, just tell me why you would do YSTR testing on any particular DNA result or any DNA evidence.
To determine if there's male DNA in the presence of a large amount of female DNA, we would do YSTR testing.
Okay. Now, in fact, you did do YSTR testing in connection with some of the items that you were provided with, correct?
Correct.
But you didn't tell us about that.
No.
And in fact, you did YSTR testing on the vaginal swabs, the external genital swab, and the swab of the right-hand fingernail clippings. And as a result of that testing, there were no Y results.
Correct.
And so you were able to determine that there was no male DNA in connection with the items that you tested.
With those three particular items, no, we could not develop a Y profile from those items.
Okay. So it's fair to say, Ms. Coronado, on the basis of the DNA testing that you and Kim Bonner did in connection with this case, there is no evidence of any link between Mr. McCarthy and any of the items that you tested.
You're going to have to rephrase that question for me.
Mr. Shapiro, we've asked this question. I think the difficulties,
The
the
witness
scientists are
obviously
very...
doesn't want to answer that question, and so...
Okay, I think that the jury's heard the testimony.
Ms. Coronado, based on your training and experience, is it uncommon how common or uncommon is it when people live together in an apartment or a house, as, for example, as a family, for them to transfer DNA amongst each other?
It's possible.
Would you say it's likely, unlikely, overall?
It's likely that
And why is that?
family members are exchanging DNA because there's such thing as handler DNA, where items are being touched or handled by multiple individuals. So you could presumably have mixtures of DNA profiles on those particular items if you're living in the same household.
Is that, would you assess that as common?
Yes.
And what is handler DNA? The defense counsel asked you about it, and you just brought it into your answer there. What is handler DNA?
Handler DNA is DNA left behind, presumably skin cells, from an item being handled, such as a doorknob.
And when skin cells are left behind in the context of handler DNA, how firmly or loosely do they tend to adhere to the objects?
Well, skin cells are generally sloughed off pretty easily onto an item, so they can easily come on and off of an item.
And how would you assess, well, let me ask you this, if an item is submerged in water for a period of time, how would that affect the likelihood of identifying handler DNA on that item?
If we're looking for handler DNA, presumably skin cells on that item, because skin cells can easily be wiped or washed away, they could be wiped or washed away off of the item.
And the longer something's under the water, how would you assess the likelihood they'd be washed away?
It's possible they could be washed away.
And just to be clear, can DNA be exchanged? Are there other ways that DNA can be exchanged among family members? Handler DNA or that kind of thing? If they're touching each other, hugging or kissing, or the DNA is exchanged. Can it be exchanged with items touching other items, and then there's items with handler DNA rubbing against other items? Yes, there's a transfer of skin cells can occur from person to an item and from an item to that person. Or another person, excuse me. How about from an item to an item? It's possible. Nothing further.
Ms. Coronado, you just testified that if an item is in the water, DNA may be washed off.
Yes.
but you know that the large plastic bag which you tested had been in the water.
Yes.
And you were able to obtain a partial DNA profile from that black plastic bag.
Yes.
And what you obtained was consistent with Bellabond.
Yes, it was consistent with the profile from Bellabond.
So obviously that hadn't been washed away, had it?
Not completely, no.
No further questions.
Thank you, ma'am. You sit down, you are excused. Your next witness, Mr. Buchanan.
Your Honor, the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts call David Crouse.
Mr. Deegan, I think we're having a witness issue.
He's not even on this one. What's that? He's not on this one. May I have one moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Apparently there's a logistical issue, Your Honor. The people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts call Sydney Chambers.
Uniform officer, straight ahead, please.
Will this please, sir? Sir, you're going to start right here. You're going to face the clerk. You're going to raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give this court and jury and the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, please.
Swear to head, sir.
Thank you. That was unexpected.
I know.
Morning, Your Honor.
It surprises all the witnesses.
That's right. Good morning, Mr. Chambers.
Good morning.
Can you please identify yourself and spell your first and introduce yourself to the jurors and spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
Morning, I am Trooper Sidney Chambers. First name is spelled S-I-D-N-E-Y. Last name is spelled C-H-A-M-B-E-R-S.
How are you employed, sir?
Employed by the Mass State Police.
In what capacity?
I've been employed now. I'm in the crime scene services section.
And what are your responsibilities there?
Basically to respond to the assistance or the request for an assistance by cities or state when they determine there's a crime scene. We get there, we document the crime scene through various means, photography, mostly digital photography, digital video. We may do a sketch of the area. We then document certain evidence, things that we consider to be of evidentiary value, and then we collect and may process that evidence for friction-rich detail.
How long have you been with the state police?
I entered the academy in December of 1984, so 32 years.
And before you worked in crime, how long have you been working in crime scene services?
I went into the unit in July of 1996, so 20 plus.
And I can't remember if you answered this when I was asking you the initial question, but are you also a fingerprint examiner, a latent print examiner?
Yes, I am.
And can you describe, were you required to undergo training and certification in order to do those responsibilities?
We were required to do training. I am not certified in fingerprints, but we do a proficiency examination yearly in the practices that we do. So I am proficient. I've been ruled proficient in friction-rich detail, comparisons, and processing.
And what is a proficiency exam?
It's a yearly examination sent by an outside agency to the lab where we have to complete it like we would conduct an ordinary case. So we process it the same way, we examine it the same way, photograph it, document it, and then submit our answers. And at some point they advise you as to whether or not you pass the proficiency exam.
And have you always passed your proficiency exams?
I have.
We've heard testimony already from Trooper Settlesing about fingerprints, what they are, that kind of thing. So I'm going to move right into your work in this case. Did you become involved in an investigation into the death of a girl named Bella Bond?
I did.
And how did you become involved?
The actual trooper who was on call that day requested me, he was tied up, requested me to respond to Quincy to assist Suffolk Detective Unit during the execution of the search warrant.
Where?
It was Hancock Street, 618 Hancock Street in Quincy.
And did you participate in the execution of the search warrant?
I did.
And specifically, did you participate in the recovery of some barbells?
I did.
And what did you do with the barbells that you recovered?
Well, I recovered 3 barbells from the basement of 618 Hancock.
I'm sorry.
And so I recovered them, and they were appropriately packaged in paper bags, transported back to my lab that same evening.
And who selected the barbells for you to process?
It was a combination of people between Lieutenant Murphy and myself, basically, determined which weights to pick.
It's Lieutenant Robert Murphy of the State Police?
That is correct.
I'm going to show you what's been marked in this trial. Exhibit 109. Do you recognize Exhibit 109?
I don't see any. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That is the 50-pound barbell, one of the 3 that I recovered from the location in Quincy.
Showing you Exhibit 110. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And what's that?
That is one of the 3 that I also recovered from Quincy, the 25-pound cap weight.
And then I'm going to show you what's been marked. Exhibit 106. Do you recognize Exhibit 106?
it is.
And what is that?
That is one of the weights that I recovered from the location in Quincy, 25-pound York weight.
And what, if anything, were you asked to do with the weights that you recovered from the 618 Hancock Street in Quincy?
They would be processed for possible friction-rich detail.
For latent fingerprints, essentially?
Correct, latent fingerprints.
And did you process them?
I did.
What method did you use to process them?
I used the common method of fuming, and then I used a fingerprint powder.
So both methods?
I'm sorry?
Both methods?
Yes.
And as to the 50-pound USA barbell, what were the results of your processing?
There was no friction-rich detail observed, no fingerprints.
As to the 25-pound cap barbell, what was the result of your analysis?
There was also no friction-rich detail observed, no fingerprints were developed.
And as to exhibit, I forget the exhibit number that's before you, the York barbell that's on, do you see the exhibit number in there? It's on the bag, I think.
Oh. 106?
And as to exhibit 106, the York barbell, what was the result of your processing?
The same as the previous two, no friction-rich detail was developed on it.
And Trooper Chambers, as between the three barbells and the USA 50-pound weight, the 25-pound cap, and the 25-pound York, which of them would you describe as the most promising surface to find fingerprints on?
This would not be one of them due to the rust or the condition of the metal. Probably the 50-pound USA.
You think that would be the most promising?
Yes, sir.
And why is that?
Well, again, the texture is, it's a rough texture, but there is a smoother paint upon the surface, so that might have areas that the oils could contact and stay upon if it remained undisturbed.
And how does that contrast with the York barbell in terms of the surface?
Well, the York barbell has a good amount of rust on it, and that's not really a good surface for leaving the oils on or for the oils to stay on.
And what about this, aside from the rust, what about the surface itself? You had contrasted it with the USA barbell that has a smooth or painted surface?
Yes, well, this is a bare metal, and it would be tougher to observe or leave prints on the tougher metal, whereas the smoother, the painted surface would provide a better surface for prints to be left on.
Thank you, Trooper Chambers. I have no further questions.
Good afternoon, Trooper Chambers.
Good afternoon.
So, bottom line of your role in the investigation is that on the basis of your examination of evidence, there is no evidence to link Mr. McCarthy to any of these barbells that you examined, is there?
There is no. Correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Trooper.
Thank you.
Your Honor, the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts call David Crouse.
So we're going to start right here, going to reach back in your face.
You solemnly swear the testimony you shall give this court in jury and the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God.
Yes. Right here, sir.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Trooper Crouse, could you please introduce yourself to the jurors and spell your first and last name for the court report?
Yes, my name is David Crouse. I'm a sergeant with the state police, and the last name is Crouse.
And how are you employed, sir?
As a sergeant on the Massachusetts State Police.
And how are you currently, in what capacity are you currently assigned there?
I'm a supervisor of the Technical Services Unit, which does a lot of surveillance and involved with phones and things like that. And at the same time, I'm also a task force officer assigned to the FBI Violent Crimes Task Force, and I work on cell phone analysis for them.
And how long have you been with the state police?
29 years.
How long in this capacity?
In the Technical Services Unit for the last 14 years, and I've been a task force officer for about 5 years.
Can you briefly discuss your, well, I guess that answers that. Have you received special, well, first of all, are you familiar with the term cell site location information?
Yes.
And what is cell site location information?
It would be essentially data that you get from the cellular phone company, similar to like your bill that you would get with an itemized each call, but the cell site part of it, it actually shows which tower and sector that you place the phone call on.
And is this, why can this information be valuable to investigators?
It puts the phone or device into a basic geographic area to show the approximate area of where the phone was used.
Have you received specialized training in cell site location information?
Yes, I have.
Can you please describe the training that you've received?
Back in 2008, 2009, I took a 40-hour class. Then I had taken another 40-hour class. Have been involved doing some cases over the next few years, and then I went into got involved with the FBI program, which is a...
So let me stop you there.
Yeah.
You said back in 2008 or 2009 you did a 40-hour class.
Yeah.
And who put on that class?
That was actually, I believe it wasn't a 40, it was a 3-day class, and that was put on by a private company out of Texas.
And what was the subject matter of that?
It was on mapping and using the call detail records with the cell locations and putting it on the maps.
And then I think you said you took another class after that.
Yes.
And when was that?
I believe it was 2010 or 11. I believe it was another like 3-day class.
And who put that class on?
That was a basic pinpoint class, and it was put on by the FBI.
And you said that after that you became involved in the FBI cell site mapping program?
Yes.
When was that you became involved with that?
I started the certification process in late 2015, early 2016.
And when you say the certification process, certification for what?
It's the FBI has a specialized group of agents and task force officers that go through approximately 500 hours of training in understanding technology. We meet with the carriers, like T-Mobile, Verizon, with their engineers and their law enforcement people, relations people, to understand kind of the information that they're giving us. In that we can get a clearer picture if it's not We can ask a lot. In our training, they come to the training and we can ask questions of them and they can explain their network to us so we can understand the technology better.
And this is a 500-hour program?
Yes.
And who are the instructors in the program?
There's a contractor that does a portion of it, and the rest of it is other members of the cellular analysis survey team of the FBI, and also the training that we get from the major carriers that bring their engineers into it.
So you said there's a cellular analysis survey team of the FBI?
Yes.
And to become a member of the cellular analysis survey team, what's required?
To take like the basic and then an advanced class and then go through that 500 hours of training.
And have you done all those things?
Yes.
Are you now a member of the FBI's cellular analysis survey team?
Yes, I am.
And what does that mean in terms of your responsibilities with respect to the cast or
it's I get, from time to time, we can be called upon to assist with other cases that are going, not just in your own regional area, but also, if there's some type of an event in somewhere else in the country, they may send us data to help work on that.
And is there, when you do work, cellular analysis survey team work, is there a requirement of peer review of your work?
Yes.
Explain that.
So after we put together a presentation, I then send a copy of my report off to another cast member. They essentially use a different mapping methodology or a different tool. They map out what I have done, and then they check to make sure that what I have put on my presentation is accurate, and they also just look at grammatical things and review the material that's there.
So, getting back to my initial question,
yes.
What is cell site location information? In other words, where do you get it and what form does it come in?
It is. It comes from the carrier, so Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, and it's obtained through a search warrant. And you usually define you want 6 months, 30 days, whatever it is. You have to lay that out in your warrant, and then it comes to you in like an Excel spreadsheet. Is the way you get the information.
And what exactly is the information though? What's identified in the information?
They're in the columns within that spreadsheet. You'll have things like time of day, duration of call, number dialed, the number being dialed, whether it was connected, whether it's a text message. It'll give you the information of the tower and the cell site that was used.
And what kind of information does it give you about the tower or the cell site that was used?
It will give a numbering of the tower for each call that the device used to make that call.
And where are these towers or cell sites? Say, for example, in Boston, where are they located?
Anywhere from a traditional tower to they could be a sign on a building and the antenna is behind it. It could be a flagpole that has been kind of disguised to look like a flagpole, but it's usually like a larger. There are some in the Midwest that they make like fiberglass cactuses and church steeples and things like that. So it's not always a big tower that's standing up.
And in, say, downtown Boston, how far apart or close together do the towers typically, how close are the towers typically to each other?
In downtown Boston, I would say that it's probably about every half to 3/4 of a mile, there's probably another tower.
Is that, did the carriers share towers, or is that for each carrier?
They may share space, but they each have individual frequencies that they use, so they could be on, you could have several companies on one tower or cell site, but they would have their own antennas for their own equipment.
How do cell phones interact with the towers or sites?
So a cell phone is nothing more than a two-way radio, and your phone, while you have it in your pocket, or you're out on the street, it is constantly reaching out and looking at the towers that are in the area, and it's constantly surveying those towers, and it's looking for signal strength. It's constantly looking at the area, and it finds towers that it looks for the most strongest signal if it's going to place a phone call or receive a phone call. So the phone will dictate which tower that it's going to use to either accept a phone call or to make a phone call.
When you say phone calls, is it the same or different for text messages?
It would be the same for also a text message.
Are there other types of communications with a tower besides phones and text messages?
Yes, there is, like obviously if you have a smartphone and you're in data, using it like a data session, several of the carriers at this point, that information can be provided, but as a normal course, we do not testify to that.
So your mapping is based on calls and text messages?
Yes.
If your phone is turned off, so if I were just to turn my phone off, would it continue to communicate with towers in the area?
No, it would not.
And when the phone is on and you say it's communicating with towers in the area constantly, are records obtainable for that that initial communication? Meaning, if my phone is looking for towers all the time, does the company keep records and provide records of that?
No, they do not.
So what are the records that you can obtain by search warrant?
They're essentially billing records, so it's user interactions with the network, whether you're placing a phone call, sending a text message, receiving a phone call or text message. That is what comes in the records.
Can you say with certainty that if a person is, let's say you have Verizon cell phone, will the nearest Verizon tower always be the one that if, let's say I have Verizon and I'm here and I make a call, will it always use the closest tower?
Traditionally, but that's not a guarantee.
Explain.
Again, the cell phone, while it's in your hand, it is looking at the towers that are around. What it will do is, it is looking for the best signal from a tower, the cleanest, clearest signal. If that happens to be a slightly further away tower, then if you were standing under one, then it would jump to that tower. But you would be within the cellular footprint, kind of the area that those towers overlap or cover.
And why is it that if I were very close to a tower, that it might not be the cleanest, clearest signal at that tower?
You could have a large building between where you're standing and it's to your back, and there's a 20-story building that is blocking out some of that signal, but there's a tower that's 4 blocks away that you actually almost have a line of sight to. The phone is going to hear that tower and get that cleanest, clearest signal from that.
You've indicated, I think, that you get the locations of the cell towers from the providers. Is that right?
Yes.
And what's involved in cell site location information mapping? So once you have all this information, how do you make maps out of it?
So we essentially, we plot out the towers that we get from the list that the carrier provides us. We put those on a map from the GPS coordinates that they provide of where their towers are. And then we take the call detail record that has the towers, and then we essentially identify that tower, identify the sector on that tower, and then we show that on the in the presentation.
And does that use some sort of software program?
Yes.
And what's that program?
It's a mapping software or tool, but the maps are they're Google Maps.
And once you map the locations, that's when you have somebody, a peer who reviews the mapping?
Yes.
Were you asked in either September or October of 2015 to assist Mass State Police troopers investigating the death of a Bella Bond?
Yes.
And were you provided cell phone records, cell phone and cell site location information records pertaining to phones?
Yes.
And did you in fact provide mapping information to the troopers?
Yes, I did.
Specifically, who asked you to become involved? Who asked for your assistance?
Trooper David Swan.
And did you provide him with cell site mapping?
Yes.
Was it the full scale sort of mapping that you do for court, or something different?
No, it was a kind of a rough draft. Basically, I put it into they call it KML file that allowed him to be able to go on to like Google Maps and be able to click around and look through the information.
And specifically, were you given information for 3 cell phone numbers?
Yes.
And was one of those 857-615-5482, which I think is now the testimony is established as Michael McCarthy's cell phone?
Yes.
Was one of them 857-526-2792, which I think now testimony has established was identified as D's cell phone?
Yes, those are numbers.
And was the third one, was the third number 857-258-0869, a T-Mobile line that I believe testimony has now established was Rochelle Bond's new cell phone?
Yes, I believe that is the number, yes.
And did you provide the KML, is it KML?
KML.
The KML files to Trooper Swan?
Yes.
And what's the reason for using KML files instead of the full-blown mapping software that's available, or mapping that's available to you for a court, for example?
At that point, it was kind of more, they were looking for investigative leads, and so I just gave them, I put it in a format that he could click and look around at stuff, whereas what I prepare for court, it's a very static, it doesn't change type of presentation, where what I provided him was more of an investigative tool that they could look at stuff.
But just so I'm clear, is there any difference in the
as far as
quality of the data?
No, it's just in a different format.
And have you prepared cell site location information maps for this trial?
Yes, I have.
Before I ask you to look at those, though, I did want to show you, and I'm using the first page of Exhibit 40, Your Honor, which is an exhibit that pertains to the number that ends in 2792.
but I'm actually just using it as essentially as an exemplar. So, not asking you if you recognize this specific page, but do you recognize this format of record?
Yes, this is a call detail record with cell site location for a Sprint phone.
And the first, can you just read us across the table, the headings, and explain to us what each column means?
Yep. So the first column is identified in bold at the top left. It says calling number. That is the phone number that is placing the phone call. And then the second column is the called number, so that's the one that's being contacted. The dialed digits is what is being pressed into the phone to make a phone call. MR is the direction. You'll see inbound, outbound, and then routed. And then start date and time, end date and time, the duration of each call, and those are in seconds. NEID is a indicator of the switch that the towers are working off of. Repole is, Sprint used to number everything under a repole number. They are now changing over to an NEID number. So the repole column will go away shortly. And then the first cell is showing, so on a Sprint phone, the last three numbers, so on the very top when it says 109, that is the actual tower that it is on, 109. And then the first number indicates the sector on the tower.
I think we're going to come back to tower sectors in more detail in a minute. But what does that mean for, well, let me first ask you, you said any ID number identifies the switch that the phone is working off of or the tower is working off of?
Well, it's essentially which there is, for each switch, there could be anywhere from a couple hundred to a couple thousand towers. It's a grouping of towers. So
this is like a region that it's?
Yes.
Sort of a regional identification?
Think of it as it's a zip code of your town, and then we can break it down so we know that it's within this town, because that's kind of like the zip code of where those towers are located. And then when we get to the tower number, that gets us to kind of the, which street it's on, and then it'll break it down further to the actual area or address.
And for these purposes, does repole number provide you with any information that the NEID number does not provide you with?
No, they're just two different numberings for the same thing.
And where it says first cell and then last cell,
yes.
What does that mean, first cell and last cell?
So last cell is when you disconnect from the phone call, they also record the tower that you terminated the call from.
And so will they track, if you're on a call and you start on one tower and you're moving and you go to another tower and you pass through several towers and you end up somewhere farther away at another tower, do they track all the towers you're on or just first and last?
Sprint does not keep track of all those. They only keep track of the starting tower and the ending tower.
Do other carriers approach it differently?
Yes.
Okay. Other carriers, the carriers that approach it differently, how do they approach it?
AT&T is the only one that keeps, they'll keep up to 20 towers that you roam going through.
In your cell phone in your original mapping and your mapping for today, so the more in-depth mapping, were you asked to help troopers identify whether certain cell phones were used in South Boston during May and June of 2015?
Yes.
This might be an appropriate time, we could approach sidebar.
I'm going to show you a map. And ask you if you recognize what it's a map of.
This is part of the one of the slides that I created as part of for the case.
And just to be clear, because I think this is a problem throughout the slides, but it says at the bottom, draft copy, not a finished copy. Should that still read that way?
No, it should not.
So it's in fact a finished copy?
Yes.
And did you prepare this diagram?
Yes, I did.
And what does this diagram represent?
This is the area of South Boston. The red and black sectors are indicating the sectors on the towers that are in those areas.
And these are cell towers for which carrier?
Both Sprint and T-Mobile.
And does this represent a mapping of cell phone records from T-Mobile and Sprint?
Yes.
And the T-Mobile number, does the diagram indicate? Well, let me ask you this: what were you mapping with respect to these towers and sectors?
So this this slide has phone calls from April. So this is essentially from all the data that I had from April 2015 through 9/18/2015, all calls that were placed on towers in this area.
I'm sorry, just so I understand, you mean all calls from the three numbers that we discussed earlier?
No, just that there are two phones
Okay.
that are being
So I'm
mapped.
sorry to jump in.
That's all.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I'm sorry, but there's... And what were you mapping in this exhibit?
I was asked for any calls that were in the geographic area of the reserve channel or Black Falcon Pier, Black Falcon Alpha.
And was that, in fact, essentially a recapitulation of the first thing that you were asked to help with? Way
Yes.
back when?
Yes.
And is this diagram maps two phone numbers, calls made on two phone numbers?
Correct.
And what are those two phone numbers?
857-615-5482, which is a T-Mobile.
And is that, for the record, I think that it's now a matter of accepted that that's Michael McCarthy's cell phone? I think Beth made a record reflect.
Yes, I think it is.
Yes.
And what's the second number?
857-526-2792, which is a Sprint phone.
And again, I think the parties essentially agree that that's the phone that's been identified as D's cell phone. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it shows all the calls off towers that cover the reserve channel? Those two numbers for the period
that are geographically in that area, yes.
from April 30th, 2015 through September 18th, 2015?
Yes.
Ask that this be marked next sequential exhibit.
Any objection?
Yes.
What's the ground, and the grounds of objection?
The objection has already been...
Oh, that's already articulated, I'm sorry, okay. That's overruled, Ms.
138.
Publishing exhibit 138 to the jury. Now, if you could, first of all, explain what these, they're sort of almost like wings. They look like airfoil or plane wings.
Yep. Pie shapes.
What are those?
That is indicating where the two longer lines come together with the little half circle. That is where the physical tower is located.
Where exactly is a physical tower located?
I guess I can't.
You can actually touch
You can
it.
Draw this? Okay.
Yeah, you can circle.
So if I see that dot, that would be a tower there.
Yep, yep.
Okay, there's
There.
another one here. So these are where towers, where the intersecting long lines come together. That's where a physical tower is.
And what's indicated, so where the long lines come together, what's indicated by the sort of curved lines that connect the two wings?
That is just an indication of where the energy, where that antenna is pointed. It has nothing to do with coverage area. That is merely just to kind of show that that's the direction from that specific antenna, which way it's pointing.
When you say it has nothing to do with coverage area, so what's the significance of which way it's pointing if it doesn't have to do with coverage area?
How far the coverage. So within that small little half circle is not the coverage area. The coverage area would go out further than that small little half moon area.
I see. But it
indicates
the direction?
it indicates the direction of the coverage area, but not the extent of how far it covers.
And how can you tell which way how can you tell as you're mapping it which way the tower or site points?
In the tower lists, it indicates for each sector on the tower, it indicates the azimuth or the actually, it wouldn't be on the call detail records. It's on an actual on the tower list, but it'll give you like the face of a clock. So 0 degrees is due north. 90 degrees would be to the right. 180 degrees would be straight down. In the tower chart, it will tell you how many degrees where that antenna is pointed, and then there's kind of the way that the energy comes off the tower. It creates about a 120-degree angle of coverage.
And you can tell this from information that you receive from the carriers?
Yes.
And just to be clear, is these diagrams you've made, these are your cell site mapping that you created?
Yes.
And it's based on information from the carriers?
Correct.
And were you asked to map all calls within a particular period, that is April 30th through September 18th, 2015, on towers near the reserve channel?
Yes.
In particular, was your attention drawn to this area that I'm circling? Actually, I better start over. This area that I'm circling?
The basic area, I didn't know the exact area, but that's the area of the reserved channel.
And there were calls, and the pull-out boxes, what do they indicate?
So the pull-out boxes indicate the date and times of phone calls that were placed on each of those respective towers.
When we say phone calls, could they be voicemails, or are these all some of them are voice, some of them are text messages?
I believe that yes, this is both text messaging and voice calls.
And I see there are two towers up there to the left of the diagram up in the Seaport District. And I think we'll talk about those towers a little later. Mm-hmm. But in particular, there are calls for the tower, sort of the bottom, sort of not far from Telegraph Hill. You see that?
Yes.
And if you would, for what date, well, let me ask you this. How did you choose these towers in terms of coverage for the reserve channel?
Essentially, closest proximity in the towers that would likely provide coverage to that area.
And for the tower that sort of just to the left of center near Telegraph Hill, on what dates did you locate calls in the records for the two phone numbers that you had?
So in that call-out box, they're kind of bold the dates: 5/26/2015, 6/9/2015, and 8/10/2015.
And drawing your attention to 6/9/2015, that was a call, an outgoing call from number 2792?
Correct.
And what time was that call made?
At 9 a.m.
And aside from that one call, all the rest of the calls on this sheet are from 5482, is that correct?
Yes, it appears that way.
I asked you about and by the way, I should have asked you about this. The call on June 9th, 2015, can you tell which sector of the tower that was bouncing off of?
From the way it's drawn, I cannot, actually, if that's just the Sprint phone, it would be, and that's the only phone call on that Sprint phone, it would be the sector that's kind of facing south and east.
South and east, so over towards City Point?
Yes.
You can actually...
That's right, I can draw. So it would be this sector that I've kind of dotted on the lines of
In which direction?
And it would be facing, headed out this direction.
But just to be clear, your arrow isn't designed to locate a specific location, it's just a direction?
No, it's just a direction.
And by the way, Trooper, were you also asked, I think I mentioned to you before, were you also asked to specifically map call activity on June 26th of 2015?
Yes, I was.
And what numbers were you asked to map? Well, let me ask you this. Were you asked to map activity between the phone ending in 2792, which we've called D's cell phone, and 5482, which is identified as the defendant's cell phone?
Yes.
For June 26th of 2015?
Yes.
Now I'm going to show you a series of slides. Your Honor, while they're looking at this, may I publish an exhibit to the jury that is relevant to his testimony? Just want to draw the jury's attention to. It's already in evidence. But I want to republish it to the jury so they can understand the context of his testimony. What's the number of the exhibit that I put in to show that? So,
Yes, it's a whole series. It starts there.
just briefly,
This is exhibit. Oh, it hasn't. Sorry. This is exhibit 138, which you just testified about.
and you had testified that the only call, well, there were a number of calls on May 26th, one call on 8/10 off that tower near Telegraph Hill and City Point, but there was one call on June 9th from 2792, Dee's cell phone. You recall that on June 9th?
Yes.
I'm just going to direct the jurors' attention to Exhibit 59, which are records of
Michael McCarthy's cell phone between June 2nd and June 13th. And that's to set his testimony in context, Your Honor. Now, I'm having technical difficulties. I'll have to do this the old-fashioned way around, I'm sorry. So I'm going to show you a series of slides that I think you prepared.
and you were asked
Well, actually, I think we could, Your Honor, safely say, to speed things along, I think defense counsel likely would stipulate that he prepared these exhibits and that they...
Okay. You know, this might be a good time to take the lunch break and see if counsel is willing to stipulate, as you just suggested, and have these pre-marked. If not, then we can talk about that and have that resolved when the jury returns from lunch at 2 o'clock. So I just remind you not to talk about this case. We are going to recess at 3:15 today to accommodate someone, and then I'll be also informing you before we release you for the day my best prediction as to where we stand. I know you've been anxious to find that out, and I just want to wait until we're at the end of today to make that. So we'll see you at 2 o'clock.
Court, all rise, please. Judge, we're going to be ready to step down for me, please.
So just be seated for just a minute. Mr. Shapiro, do you need some time to decide whether you're going to raise an objection here such that we should deal with this a few minutes before 2 o'clock? Or do you want to say something now?
I'm unclear on where we're going with this.
You know, all I was trying to do, there's a series of slides that map the cell phone movements on June 26, 2015. He prepared them and is prepared to testify about them. Okay. Rather than showing it slide by slide and saying, did you prepare these slides? Is this apparent? I was hoping that defense counsel would agree only to the point that he prepared these slides.
Okay.
So I'm learning, I think maybe for the first time, that the evidence upon which this witness has supposedly mapped the area is not in evidence. And I do object to the mapping coming in without the underlying data. Now, we have evidence of the cell site location information, but the witness testified that there is underlying data which determines the particular sector, I guess, of the particular phone, which is not in evidence.
But what he's referred to as the tower chart or something, or tower?
Yes.
Okay.
And that hasn't been provided, and we have no basis, no way to verify the information that's being provided without that underlying information.
Okay.
There are two issues here, Your Honor. One issue is that the data is, well, first of all, defense counsel's expert who produced mappings that are identical essentially to this expert's mappings use the same or similar data.
So it's not like defense counsel has not had this data?
Correct.
Okay.
Moreover, it's very clear that an expert is allowed to testify to opinions based on facts not in evidence, so long as they would be independently admissible and are of the type that an expert in the field would typically rely on. So I think he's certainly permitted to testify based on that information, and I think defense counsel's expert has access to the same information that this expert has access to. So I don't think I think it's a faulty objection.
I don't know what particular information this witness is relying on, and I believe
well,
that
Mr.
that
Deacon
is
has just
necessary.
represented that your separately retained expert has relied on the same data. I don't know, you're saying you don't really know that? You have no way of knowing that?
No, I know that our expert has reviewed certain data, but it may be different than the data that this witness apparently has reviewed. And at this point, we haven't offered any of the data that our expert has reviewed or the mapping that he's done.
Yes.
If I were...
Oh, I'm sorry.
I haven't offered that in evidence.
I understand that.
Right.
Mr. Deacon is saying it doesn't have to itself be admitted into evidence so long as it is independently admissible. I think that states the case law correctly.
We don't know that it's independently admissible if we haven't seen it.
It's cell tower information provided to the expert by the carriers that identifies where their cell towers are. There's only, they provide the same data to every expert. There's only one set of data from T-Mobile, one set of data from Sprint, one set of data from Verizon. For a defense expert to have done the work that he did and that was then provided to me, he would have had to have had access to the data from those providers, exactly in the same way that this expert has access to it. I would further say, so I think it's not a meritorious objection on its face. I would further say that to the extent that defense counsel actually believes that this information was somehow critical to preparing for a trial, which really can't be the case given that his experts had access to it too, there was no request in discovery. I provided this all in discovery. There was no request for any underlying data in discovery. So I think at this point it's too late to say they want the data, but as a matter of fact, they already have it, or their expert already has it.
You said there were two issues. Is the second issue whether Mr. Shapiro can agree without going through each one that this
that was
witness...
That was my issue, Your Honor.
Okay,
Just
rather
than go through slide by slide.
Okay, but those are the two issues. The one we talked about the underlying data,
yeah.
But now we started with this question of whether Mr. Shapiro, you'd be willing, without him going through each slide, to agree that he's prepared these slides.
Except for my objection to the evidence, I don't have a problem with, if it's going to be admitted, agreeing to the particular slide.
Okay. I just wanted to separate out the issues. Okay. So, anything further?
Another issue which apparently some of the data that has been mapped relates to May 26th.
And we talked about that at sidebar. Is this what we talked about at sidebar?
We talked about June 26th.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Right. June 26th, presumably we objected to on the grounds that there's no evidence that Mr. McCarthy knew about the discovery of the body. But as for May 26th, At this point, the relevance of that escapes me, given the fact that it has been fairly definitively established that Bellabon was alive on May 26th. So where the cell phones were on that day and what the evidence is, I don't see the relevance.
Your Honor, the relevance of the May 26th date and all the dates is that every other call in the area of South Boston during that period of time was made from Mr. McCarthy's cell phone. There is one date, June 9th, where there's a call from Dee's cell phone, and that's why I republished the exhibit to the jury, exhibit 59, which shows that Mr. McCarthy's cell phone was in. There was no activity on Mr. McCarthy's cell phone from June 2nd through
June 13th.
June 13th, right? Your Honor's got to handle this. So I think it's relevant to show that on those towers that cover that South Boston, all of the calls during the relevant period, during the period that we have data for, are from his cell phone, and the one that wasn't was from the period when his cell phone wasn't operational, or wasn't, there's no activity on it.
Okay, so it's the kind of, okay, I understand your point. Okay, so with regard then, we're going to take the lunch break. I think I've heard the issues. I would overrule, I think I see the relevance of 526. It puts everything in context for the reasons Mr. Deacon just stated. I think Mr. Deacon has correctly stated the case law with regard to whether the evidence has to separately be admitted versus admissible, and with respect to the defendant's ability or access to the same information. I would also overrule Mr. Shapiro's objection. So there's otherwise, I think there is an agreement that he prepared these slides. So with your objection noted, maybe we can pre-mark these exhibits during the break and come back here at 2 o'clock.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
Court, all rise, please. Court's in a lunch recess to 2 o'clock. Thank you. Executive court, please. Thank you.
Oh. Mr. Champa? Mr. Champa? Mr. Champa?
Session.
Your Honor, I apologize. An issue occurred to me that I should have raised with the court, and I apologize for imposing on the court in this way, but I feel that I have to. I would like to ask the court's permission to interrupt this witness to call Ms. Taryn Devlin. She was called here today. Frankly, I forgot. I'm not even sure I knew that we were breaking at 3:15 yesterday. She is.
Okay, see, I understand that this is the late added witness. Right. Mr. Shapiro objected. I've ruled on that objection. But as to scheduling, you're concerned?
Well, she's apparently quite emotional.
So you want permission to put her on and get her done before 3:15?
Or maybe, right, to start at 2 with her and then come back to this witness as soon as she's concluded.
Okay, I'm going to allow that. I should want to try to accommodate counsel to the extent I can. It's not unfair. So we'll see you at 2.
Court, all rise, please. Court's in recess to 2 o'clock. Thank you.